if you guys would help me welcome Karen Hall. She is the founder and director of Dialectical Behavioral Therapy Center. Dr. Hall has been in private practice for over 20 years and is the founder and director of the DBT Center in Houston, Texas. The center offers both standard and intensive DBT treatment. She focuses on working with treatment-resistant depression, chronic anxiety, trauma, suicidality, self-injury, eating disorders, and borderline personality disorder. An expert in dialectical behavioral therapy, Dr. Hall is a licensed psychologist and a certified coach. She has served as a speaker and trainer for both private and public schools on a national level and has served as a consultant for the implementation of DBT in residential treatment and mental health centers. She is a DBT trainer with the Treatment Implementation Collaborative and has presented workshops on both a local and national level. She blogs for Psychology Today and Psych Central. She is the co-author of The Power of Validation and author of Savvy, Mindfulness Exercises, The Emotionally Sensitive Person, and she is on the board of directors for the NEA BPD and the founder of Healing Hearts of Families annual conference. So if you'll give her a round of applause, help me welcome her.
Good. I can walk under the projector. Good evening, everyone. I am so impressed that you're here. You can't go anywhere in Houston right now. So thank you so much for being here. I'm happy just to have this slide up there. 4 years ago, 5 years ago even, I don't know that I could have that slide up there. Do you know why? Recovery. Because some years ago, no one believed that anyone could recover from borderline personality disorder. They didn't talk about recovery. They talked about minimizing symptoms, but they didn't talk about recovery. And even today, if you Google borderline personality disorder, it scares me what you will find. And breaks my heart, too. Because when people get the diagnosis and they look it up, it's a horror story. Part of that horror story is true. You know, that years ago we didn't know how to treat borderline personality disorder, and we as clinicians did not do a good job. And sometimes we made things worse. But today, we know how to treat it. We know what to do. And recovery is absolutely possible. It's even likely. So let's talk. Let's see if I can hit the right button. Nope. Okay. So borderline personality disorder is a serious mental illness. And you can see some of the reasons that it's considered so serious. The rate of suicide is between 8 and 10%. That's high. 33% of completed suicides have been shown to have borderline personality disorder. 60 to 70% of people who have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder make suicide attempts. It's the highest risk for females and the second highest for males. Treating borderline personality disorder used to scare clinicians. In fact, many clinicians didn't want to treat it. And I think that's partly because we didn't know how. And clinicians want to help people. And when it's hard to know what to do, it makes us feel bad too. And the importance of treating borderline personality disorder effectively is very high, as you can see. Because the people who are living with borderline personality disorder and their families, and the people that come in touch with them, the suffering is so high, the pain is so high, because the disorder is so disabling. It's important that we get it right. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on symptoms because we're talking about recovery, but I do want to just give an overview. What is borderline personality disorder? To have borderline personality disorder, you need to have 5 of these 9 symptoms. What I want you to think about, though, is the many combinations that you can have if you have 5 of these 9. People with borderline personality disorder can present in so many different ways, and the symptoms can be so different. So it's often very hard to diagnose. So fear of abandonment. People with borderline personality disorder really want to fit in. They want to be a part. They want to be connected. And one of the biggest fears of all that they have is that people will abandon them. The problem is that abandonment gets really blown up. And so they may call you and say, okay, call me back. And you don't call back in 10 minutes, and they're furious at you. And they say, you hate me. Why don't you get back to me? Don't you care about me? Don't you care about my feelings? Because that abandonment can kick in that fast. So the fear of abandonment is one of the things that goes through relationships and makes them chaotic. It makes them hard for the people who love someone with borderline personality disorder as well as the individual who has borderline personality disorder. What I want to say here is that individuals who have borderline personality disorder, in my experience, are some of the most loving and caring people I have ever met. They are so tuned in to other people's emotions, and they're very tuned in to what is rewarding for other people, how to make them happy, what's important to them. The problem is they can be angry as well, inappropriate, intense anger. And so when they get triggered with the abandonment or they get scared, then they can go into that anger that it can be destructive in families and that they can't control the way they express that anger. They don't have the skills to do that. It's also true that that contributes to those unstable relationships that you see up there. And it's like a roller coaster. Many people use that visual, that having a relationship with someone who has borderline personality disorder can be like being on a roller coaster. But I also want to let you know that for the individual who has BPD, it's like a roller coaster for them too. They will describe to me, I don't know why I do this. I just called her and told her to leave me alone. I never will talk to her again, and that's the 10th time I've done it this year. And then they're so regretful later. But the behavior keeps going on and causing destruction and unstable relationships. A lot of times, individuals with borderline personality disorder don't have a clear sense of who they are. So they try to fit into different groups. And they may go be Buddhist for a while, or they may join a hippie colony, or they may go to be a rock singer. They try on different identities because they are looking for that place to belong. We all want to belong. We all want to fit in, and they can't find it. They feel very different on the inside, so they keep looking for a way to belong. Impulsive and destructive behaviors, self-harm, drinking, eating disorders, drugs, cutting, quitting jobs impulsively, ending relationships. Their emotions control them. And so when their emotions get very strong, then they do behaviors that aren't helpful or effective. And it's a cycle that they get angry and start hating themselves. Unstable mood, it can change very quickly. They can be in a really positive mood and then suddenly it's rage. And that's exhausting for them and for you. Chronic feelings of emptiness. Emptiness is hard to describe if you've never felt it, and it seems to be different for different people. For many of the people I talk with who have borderline personality disorder, that feeling of emptiness is about not having feelings, that they try to numb themselves out and avoid feelings. And then the other part of emptiness is that there's no sense of self and no sense of connection. It feels chaotic on the inside, and they describe that as a feeling of emptiness. But it's different for different people, so I'm not sure we have really defined that well yet. So what we're coming to is basically that borderline personality disorder is a disorder of dysregulation. Dysregulation of self, interpersonal dysregulation, cognitive dysregulation, behavioral dysregulation, and emotional dysregulation. The key to treating and working with borderline personality disorder is to recognize that it is all of what we're talking about comes from a difficulty regulating emotions. That they have very intense emotions and that they don't have the skills and tools to manage those emotions. And so it causes dysregulation in other areas that we talked about, like sense of self and behavior and the way that they think. So what is emotion regulation? If you don't have borderline personality disorder, your emotions will be much like this. They build, they come up to a peak, and then they start to go back down to baseline. And you have kind of a baseline. Feelings actually don't hang around very long. They come and they go, like waves. When you have emotion dysregulation, we're not talking about something that's different than what you and I have. But what we're talking about is that emotion is so strong, it goes so high, it stays around so long, it's more reactive, and it interferes with their ability to make decisions. You can be angry, you can be sad, you can be scared, but most of the time, that doesn't interfere with your ability to make a decision that is reasonable and effective. Dysregulation is when you can't do that. And my guess is most of us have been there too. It's just very infrequent. Some of you have probably been so angry that you destroyed something, maybe. Maybe you've been upset enough. See, I heard it. Maybe some of you, this is me. I used to be real impulsive with email. I'd get really upset with something somebody did, and I would send an email and I'd push send, and I want it back right away. How did I get that email back? Have any of you ever done that? That's dysregulation on a smaller level. If you've ever called an ex over and over and over, if you've ever destroyed an ex's clothes, that's dysregulation. That's when our emotions control us. And that's the issue that happens with people with BPD, only it happens over and over and over. So what I want to make sure is that emotion dysregulation is not just being upset. Emotion dysregulation is when it really does get you so upset that you can't think straight. So here's the model that I want. This is a very, very scientific model of neurology that I want you to understand about emotion dysregulation. So think of the brain as being like an elephant. Okay? A 2-ton elephant. The elephant is the emotional part, and the rider on that elephant is the cognitive part, the reasonable part, the logical part, right? So everything is hunky-dory as long as the rider and the elephant want to go in the same direction, right? We're good to go. Now what happens if the elephant decides he wants to go in a different direction than the rider? Who's going to win? The elephant. For someone who has BPD, this is us, actually, because our emotional brain is very strong. And if it wants to take over, it can. It just doesn't very often. That's our survival system. You know, sometimes you may be running before you even know why you're running. It's basic survival. For someone who has BPD, though, this is an even bigger elephant. It's a 4-ton elephant. And it's not helping us survive. It's not helping them survive. It's getting in the way. Individuals with BPD are born with what we call an emotional vulnerability to emotions. And what that means is that they are quicker to react biologically than people who don't have BPD. That something happens, and they're going to react faster, their emotions going to fire quicker than mine. They're also going to have a more intense reaction. So it's going to go up higher. It's going to be the red curve there. Mine is the blue, theirs is the red. Happens faster. So you see something that upsets you. You see a friend of yours who said they couldn't meet you because they had a class, and you see them out drinking coffee with someone. So I'm going to get upset. The person with BPD is going to get upset faster. It's going to go up fast, and it's going to be more intense, and it's going to take a longer time to get back to baseline. You guys with me? So if you had emotions that were getting you in all kinds of trouble, you were acting in ways that you didn't like and you regretted, you were making decisions, and well, why did I decide that afterwards? It feels out of control. My guess is you would try to find a way to tame those emotions. And that's what happens with BPD. They're dysregulated, and they're trying all kinds of ways to manage those emotions, to numb them, to avoid them. They start to be afraid of their emotions because their emotions get them in so much trouble. And they hurt so much. And so they may try alcohol, they may try drugs, and then they start to judge themselves, and then it's like, okay, I behave this way, everybody's going to abandon me. And so it all starts feeding back in and becomes a vicious, like a tornado. You know, the more I do something to try to regulate myself, the worse things get. You know, I try to drink and numb myself, and I feel better, and then I get a ticket, and then I wreck the car, and then life is in chaos, and then people are angry at me again. So their efforts sometimes make things worse. So when you avoid emotions, all kinds of things happen. And I want to play a little video for you that it's from the ACT people. And I think it sort of shows part of what happens when you're afraid of your emotions and you start to avoid them.
Imagine that you're steering a boat that's far, far out at sea. And below the deck of your boat, out of sight, lies a vast horde of demons. And they've all got enormous claws and razor-sharp teeth. And they've made a deal with you. As long as you keep your boat drifting aimlessly out at sea, and they'll stay beneath the deck so that you don't have to look at them. But if you ever decide to start heading towards shore, then they immediately rush up on the deck. And they'll flap their wings, bare their fangs, and threaten to tear you to shreds. Not surprisingly, you don't like that very much. So you say, "Sorry, demons, I didn't mean it. Please, go back down below." Then you turn the boat around and drift back out to sea. And the demons disappear beneath the deck, out of sight again. So you breathe a sigh of relief, and everything seems okay. For a while. The problem is, you soon get fed up of drifting aimlessly. You start to get bored, lonely, miserable, resentful, anxious, depressed. You see all those other ships heading towards shore. And you know, actually, that's where you really want to be going. So one day, you pluck up the courage and turn the wheel and start heading towards shore again. But the moment you do, those demons swarm up on the deck again and threaten once again to rip you into pieces. But here's the interesting thing. Although these demons are very good at threatening you, they never actually cause you physical harm. And why not? Well, because they can't. All they can do is growl loudly, wave their claws and look terrifying. But physically, they can't touch you. The only power they have is the ability to intimidate. So, if you believe they're going to do what they say they're going to do, then they've really got control of the boat. But once you realize they can't actually do any physical harm, well, then you're free, as long as you're willing to accept the demon's presence. And all you have to do to reach land is let the demons gather round. Let them scream at you all they like, and keep steering the boat towards shore. The demons may howl and protest, but they're powerless to stop you.
Like what it's like for someone who has BPD to try to get into recovery. It's terrifying. We're asking them, if you could imagine something you're terrified of doing, we're asking them to do that. We're asking them to take a journey that is painful and scary. You know, when I went into psychology, I was naive because I loved this idea of therapy and helping people, and it was a mission for me. And so it was a big shock when I realized everybody didn't want to just come talk to me. What? And it dawned on me finally, therapy's painful. And for someone, if you go back to the part where the emotions are so intense, more intense than we have experienced, except at our peak moments. And we're asking them to sit here and talk about the very thing that scares them. And to experience, to let go of the alcohol, to let go of the drugs, to let go of the spending or the restricting or the overeating or whatever it is they're using to try to numb themselves. We're asking them to let go of that and feel fear and feel sadness and feel the emotions, because that's the path to getting well. We're asking them to do a lot. And when we ask them to do that, we need to be able to give them other skills to manage those emotions. They can't just stop. They're doing the best they can. Who would destroy their life on purpose? They're doing the best that they can. And our job is to say, I can teach you how to manage these emotions. And that's part of what we have to do as clinicians, and that's the part we didn't know for a long time. And so now we teach skills for how to manage very intense emotions. So recovery is possible. It's a painful, painful journey. It's a tough one. But what is recovery? What is recovery from borderline personality disorder? There's something called dropping out of the symptoms that we talk about in psychology. Dropping out of the symptoms means that those criteria that I shared with you, the 9, that they no longer meet criteria. That's called dropping out of the symptoms. So they no longer have the symptoms of borderline personality disorder in a way that interferes with their life. Is that recovery? I would say no. Recovery is more than that. Recovery, I believe, is having a life worth living, a life that they want to live. And we can do that. We can help people with borderline personality disorder create not only drop out of the symptoms, but also create the life that motivates them to keep going through that journey that's painful. Does it mean that they'll never have any symptoms again or never have any really intense emotions again? And you, if you're a family member, if you love someone with borderline personality disorder and suddenly they're yelling about something, and you say, you've been through therapy, what's up with this? Did you take your medication? It doesn't mean that. They're still going to have emotions. They're still going to have really tough times. And so I challenge us that we don't hold them to a microscope that perhaps we wouldn't hold to ourselves, because we have moments. And I think sometimes it's our fear that you're feeling sad. Oh no, are you headed for depression? And that makes us avoid emotions, and then we're communicating to them it's not okay. The transactional model is very simple. And the transactional model is where you come in. Because the transactional model says the interactions with people, that people change based on what the other person says. So let me give you an example. If you have a 20-year-old daughter who comes in at 3 in the morning, you were expecting her at 11, she lives with you. There's a storm going on. When she walks up into the living room, are you going to say, "Hi, honey, did you have a good time?" No. You're going to, "Where the heck have you been? Don't you care about anybody but yourself?" Because you're upset and you love her. But now if I come at you and say, "Where the heck have you been? Do you know I have to go to work tomorrow? I've been waiting up for you. Couldn't you pick up a phone? Is your hand broken?" Okay. What's her response going to be? Anger back. Anger back. Our job is to stay regulated. I'm not saying you let her off the hook. But our job is to stay regulated, because transactions, people react to us, and individuals with borderline personality disorder will react stronger and longer and more and faster. I am extremely grateful for Jamie. Jamie is recovered. And I think that her voice says more than mine ever could. So I appreciate always that you're willing to share to help other people. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie.
Can you hear me? Good evening. How is everybody? I'm pepping myself up because I'm feeling a little tired, so bear with me for a second if I totally brain fart every now and then, because it's probably going to happen, and I'll just kind of blankly stare at you for a second. My name is Jamie, and I struggle with borderline personality disorder. Still, even recovered. I'm going to go back into a little bit of what that means for me now, but before I do that, sort of go through how I got to where I am. I'm here from Houston, born and raised. Proud of my city that I love, especially these last couple of weeks. I was a very sensitive child. Very, very sensitive child. I cried about everything. I got angry about it, especially if you went near my food. I was a germphobe. You went through my food, like you would hear it for hours, right? Everything was just really intense for me, and I think what started to happen because the people around me didn't really know what to do with that, mainly like my parents, my family, and siblings and such, is sort of, it became this, oh, she's overreacting again, or she's being overdramatic again, or she just wants attention, or what have you. And so I think I either one of two things would happen. Either I would sort of throw a fit and everybody would just say, okay, yeah, sure, and just kind of carry on or whatever, or they would tell me to just kind of move on with it. So then I learned different ways to cope with those emotions when they would flare up, like, if you can't hear me, then I'll scream at you, and then maybe you'll hear me. And so that became a communication tool that didn't serve me well through the rest of my life, up until DBT and such, and even still at times. Without going too much into it, as a child, I did experience childhood trauma and abuse. And as you will hear about BPD, there is often a case where somebody with BPD has experienced trauma and abuse, but that's not necessarily always the case. If you have a loved one with BPD, it doesn't mean everybody thinks that you abused them. Maybe there were other things that were going on, and I'll leave that to Karen to kind of give more clinical kind of ideas about it. But for me, that was the case. I had very intense emotions, was very sensitive, like a raw nerve, and I was going through that. And I'm yelling and screaming, hey, there's stuff going on, and people are like, oh, she's just, you know how she is, and oh, kids are kids, and all of these things. It didn't go well with me. I couldn't take even the slightest pain. I like to tell this story just to kind of give an idea of how intense that is just naturally for me. When I was 8 years old, there was a situation. My uncle lived with us. He brought home this kitten. I am a huge animal lover. I prefer animals over humans any day. I have to be honest, nothing personal. I spent hours with that kitten, and I loved it. And it was my best friend. And you know what? Didn't invalidate me. Didn't care about my mood, didn't judge me, didn't ignore me, didn't tell me not to be overdramatic. So, this kitten was my buddy, and my mom wouldn't let me keep it. And I couldn't handle that. So somewhere in my little 8-year-old mind, that pain, that idea of that loss was too much, and I made my first suicide attempt. I tried to overdose with over-the-counter medication. And then, after you already do that, you're getting sick and these things are happening. And I don't want to tell anybody because I'm going to get in trouble because I'm being overdramatic, right? And I'm looking for attention and all of these things. So I know now, just in case anybody wonders, I've had it all fully checked out. I'm okay. So I just got really sick for a couple of days, and I didn't tell anybody, and I just held on to that. But then something was planted, right? Then there was this new option in the back of my mind when I couldn't handle things. And that's where that suicidal ideation started to kind of take place, and something I would refer back to throughout life. The abuse that I was going through ended right around puberty and adolescence. When all the hormones and everything are going crazy anyways. And so, you're this emotional raw nerve. You've got all these hormones going on. This abuse situation has stopped, and all the numbing and avoiding and everything that you've been trying to do just to cope with that, all of a sudden everything goes, and I freaked out and I went nuts. I think I was in the 6th grade. And I don't remember exactly what triggered it. But I had decided that I wanted to try to kill myself again, and I had tried to cut on myself, and it hurt. So that wasn't the way for me to do it. So I went to school the next day, and I told my best friend that I didn't want to live anymore. And of course, she was terrified, and she ran to the counselor's office. The counselor called me in, and when we called my mom, oh gosh, Again, I'm terrified, and she's angry. And I love my mother. She didn't know. She didn't know. She didn't understand what was going on. Again, I'm this overdramatic child, right? This emotional child who just can't seem to get over things or get past things. She told me that she would talk to me about it when she got home from work, and so those were very long hours waiting for her to get home between school and when she got home from work. And she got home and said, "Get in the car, we're going somewhere." She took me to a hospital in the neighborhood, and in the parking lot, she said, "I want you to tell me everything, or I'm going to check you in here." And I'm terrified because, again, I don't want to be abandoned. I don't understand. I don't understand. I think at one point as a kid, I just said, I must have an invisible sign on my head somewhere that this stuff keeps happening. Or maybe there's something wrong with me because nobody else seems to get it, I don't think they could see past that emotional intensity. So anyways, I became a very rebellious teenager. I started getting into a lot of drugs and drinking, self-mutilation by the time I was 14, with cutting on myself or burning sometimes. I was a punk rock girl, so I had a hippie mom. I had to go the extreme to totally rebel against that. So I was really angry, and that did well with that kind of style, and I got to hang out with all the other misfits that were just as angry. We were the cool kids. But I was miserable, and I was sad, and my interpersonal relationships with others were terrible. I've always been a very, I think, articulate person, this was one of the words, or animated, or well-spoken, or funny, or all of these things. And people tend to like me and be drawn towards me, either unless I just have a straight face, which I have the resting, scary face. We'll just call it that. And then I have to correct that sometimes, because I'm not always aware what my face is doing, which is something that is also sometimes common with borderlines. I would do well with people in situations, and then they would see me have an outburst, or they would see me get upset, and then they would backpedal, and they would sort of like me from afar, or talk about me. I would hear that people thought I was crazy or a hot mess. And I went through a lot of struggles where I lost a lot of people that I loved and cared about, a lot of friends. I would, hear all kinds of things about the trauma I'd been through, because we just always attributed it to that. We didn't realize there were other components that were affecting things there. So I heard a lot of, "Why can't you just get over it?" If I had an outburst or acted out in some sort of way, well, lots of people have problems and not everybody acts like this. What's wrong with you? There was nobody around that recognized the emotional sensitivity in me and knew that there were skills to teach me, because professionals didn't even really at that point in time either, which was only 5 years ago, because I'm very young. So anyways, I want to get more into the recovery part, but I don't want to leave out some of this. I have been in and out of different modalities of therapy since I was 12, when the abuse stopped. Within that year, I started therapies. I would start digging into the trauma, and I would leave, which you'll also hear, is very common. I couldn't deal with it. I didn't have the skills to deal with the intensity of the emotions that would come up to even face that trauma. And then throughout these therapy years, I would hear things like, "Jamie, you just have to find a way not to get so upset." And I'd be like, "Great, tell me how." I would get diagnoses like, depression and anger management. You're angry. Well, no kidding. What do I do about it? Take these meds, which I'm not against meds. I'm just saying that for me, it took more than just that. More than a Band-Aid, I guess. I'm not going to go into that. I feel like I'm discounting that, and I'm not. So I couldn't figure it out. All I know is that it was getting worse and worse and worse. And sort of like, Karen was talking about, for a while it would seem like I would find something. And maybe it was a good thing, and I started to feel good for a while. I went through adolescent 12-step programs. I got into doing alternative thought type things and just anything that I could to throw at it to try to feel better, and it would work for a little bit. And then I would explode, and then I would get the rejection. We thought you were better. Why are you still struggling with this? And this went on and on and on, well into my 30s. And, a failed marriage, all kinds of things that I wanted to do in life that I hadn't been in a healthy enough place to do, like have children, like have a family, like focus. Actually, I focused on my career a bit, and I've been pretty lucky there. But I am an activist, so it gives me somewhere to put all that intensity, and I kind of get to do that for a living, so that's really cool. That works for me. But I had been seeing the same therapist for 3.5 years, and I was still getting that, Jamie, you just have to try to find a way, or Jamie, if you could just this, or Jamie, if you could just that. I was in a relationship that was very intense, and I don't break up well. Not even kind of. Even if in the moment I'm the most reasonable person in the world, give me an hour. Oh my gosh. You're going to have a letter this long about everything, and not only are you going to hear all that, you're going to hear about everything I went through, and how could you abandon me, this poor wounded person? So there's sort of, without I think even intending to, a manipulation that would come into my relationships as well. I'm very loving, I'm very caring, I'm very generous, and I show people this, and then when they don't understand me and my vulnerabilities, how could you do that? I've done all this, and just really not good at interpersonal relationships. This relationship I was in ended. And I went down into one of the darkest places I've ever been in my life. I got to the point where I was thinking about suicide all day, every day. If I was sitting outside smoking a cigarette, I was looking around me and, what was there? What could I use? If I was driving, I was looking at what I could jump off of. If I was researching, what if I did these sorts of ways or these combinations of things? And if I fail, what's going to happen? Because I don't want to fail. That's the worst. In my head in that moment. So I had come up with a plan to check out. It was going to be the day before this person who had broken my heart's birthday. I wanted them to know how much they'd hurt me. And it wasn't just about them. It was also something I realized every time I had gotten suicidal was, it wasn't that I wanted to die. Is that I couldn't stand the pain. I didn't know what to do. I'd been trying things. It wouldn't go away. Clearly, I was fundamentally flawed and broken. I should just give up, right? And it'd probably be better off for everybody else around me anyways. And it's real hard when you get to that point to kind of reach out and see beyond that. I had, a few months before, started going to meetings for adult survivors of the type of abuse I'd gone through. Again, all this stuff started coming up. I became unraveled and didn't know what to do with all of it. This partner that broke up with me months later got a lot of the brunt of that. Night terrors, They did pretty well with me waking up on a regular basis and screaming and punching my pillow, so I have to give them that credit. They had a psychology degree, so they thought that they could deal with me, but that didn't work out. It's okay. I'm in a better place now, so and it pushed me to a place that I needed to go to get help. So anyways, I was coming unraveled. I was doing all this research online, and I kept coming across PTSD. And I thought I had that. I'd already been diagnosed with, major depression or clinical depression before. So I went and I sought out a trauma specialist who had experience working especially with women that had experiences like me. I went to her. She agreed with my self-diagnosis of PTSD and, of course, again, major depression. But then she said something that totally threw me off. She said that I had a trauma-based personality and that she also thought I had borderline personality traits because they can't call it disorder the first time. It's very serious. And I thought, that's crazy. Crazy, right? That word crazy. I had known of one person ever that I'd heard had borderline personality. And oh man, she was really out there and I couldn't be that bad, right? Woo! It was that stigma that you see, that you hear about online. They're a hot mess, stay away from them. Better off. They might be nice now, but just wait. Just wait. So here's all this new information. She tells me about a couple different types of therapy, but what she really stresses to me is dialectical behavior therapy, which just happens to be great for all three of those diagnoses. She told me about a couple of places I came across. I'm not endorsing, it just happens to be where I went, although I don't mind endorsing. But I found the DBT Center of Houston. And I went on to their website, and they were like, if you've been recently diagnosed with these things or suffer from these things, and I was like, that's me. That's totally me. Like all the things. So I called and I made an appointment. Well, in between that call and the appointment, I got dumped. I got into that suicidal place, and I'd made this decision that I was going to do it Thursday night. Well, my intake evaluation at the DBT Center was Wednesday. And with any little bit of anything I had in me, I went. And I was numb, which I found out later in DBT therapy is an emotion. That's an important one to know. I was numb, and the therapist could tell. She could see it in me. She told me, I can see it on you. I can hear it in your voice. Have you been thinking about it? I said, well, yeah, She said, well, like, how would you do it? I'm not going to give away my secrets. I don't want her to know. Because for me, at least, if I'm talking about it, I'm not ready to do it. If I stop talking about it, I'm in a really, really, really dangerous place. And I say that because a lot of people still view if you're reaching out or you're crying out, that your attention's sinking. Well, yeah. You are. You need attention. You're crying out for help. So that should be taken seriously. I was past that point. The therapist, looked at me with so much concern and said, I really think that I can help you, but I need you to be here next week. And I went home. Ooh, I'm going to get a little choked up here. That good emotion. It is a good one. Because I know where I've come from. It's a good one. So I went home and I went up to my room. I had a lot of roommates, and I got my computer out to put on Netflix and just kind of completely zone out, not have to think of anything. And Windows decided to do like 35 updates right then. Now I'm there having to think. And I'm thinking about this person I'm still very much in love with, and what I'm wanting to do and what that would do to them. Because I've always been able to think about other people and not wanting to hurt them. So even in that point, it was like, well, maybe I'll just continue to suffer so that they don't have to hurt. But then something happened, and I started to think about me, and I started to think about my activism and how I'd had success in that, and that for me was like the whole point of it all, like that's whether given or chosen was what I believed to be my purpose, and I didn't know if I was ready to quit doing that because it worked, I had a good voice. I could stand up, I could be heard, and I could make an effect. I hadn't had children yet, hadn't left this continent more than once. And just really lucked out on that one, I wanted to travel and do things, and I knew that this was it. I knew I didn't want to be in pain, but I knew this was it, and I knew I wouldn't ever have a chance to do any of that if I went through with it. So I decided to give DBT a chance. It was hard. That next day came. Anxiety, right? Everything. Knowing the next day this person was going to have a birthday party and I wasn't going to be there, right? I messaged anybody I could in my support group. I had 6 Facebook windows open. Hey, I don't know what to do, and people carried me through. And then one friend said something really important. And she said, do you love them enough to let them do what they need to do for them? And I went, that's a really good question. So I went with that. Midnight came, and I sent instead a letter of acceptance towards that person. An acknowledgement of them doing what they needed to do that was best for them. And happy birthday. And so I stayed. And I was there the next week to see my therapist. It was awkward at first. Sit in this room full of people at the skills group. And I'm like, I'm probably crazier than the rest of them. But then I realized that I'm not really crazy. Unless we just like that word sometimes. Sometimes it can be fun, I guess. I was really against it for a while, and then that sort of took away from what I was saying to people. So I did it. I started learning skills. I struggled a lot. I had my daily DBT card I would fill out, and I was probably still having 3 to 5 outbursts a week, anger outbursts. I remember the first time my therapist said, Jamie, you haven't had an outburst in 2 weeks. You're right, I haven't. It doesn't mean I didn't get mad. It doesn't mean I didn't get upset. Doesn't mean I didn't get unreasonably joyful. Because there's that side to it too. All those things happened. I would walk a few steps, trip, fall down, skid my knees, get back up, limp a little bit, eventually get back to walking. And that happened over and over again. And it still does. That's an important thing for me in my recovery that I finally needed to realize. There's something, I don't know that it's a clinical term, but Karen likes to call DBT guilt. After I guess graduated is the word, finished the DBT program, I fell right on my face. It was not that magic pill. And nobody ever told me it was going to be. Except society. That's another thing I needed to learn. I'm different. I have a neurobiological difference. I am emotionally sensitive. I'm always going to be. I don't need to get rid of that. I don't. Because I'm also passionate and loving and creative, just as much as I can get angry and I can get sad. It's it's a little bit of both, right? So I'm always going to kind of be an intense person, right? That's okay. And my emotions are going to hit me. And the normal ebbs and flows of life are a little bit more intense for me. And I know that. And I'm compassionate with myself about it now. And that's what's helped me a lot in combination with these skills. I started to notice that just as time goes by, practicing these skills, going over them, it's like it sinks in a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more over time. I am getting to a point with myself where it's okay if I'm not okay sometimes. And it's all right if that's intense. And if I fall down, all I can do is get back up and put my best foot forward. I don't beat myself up as much as I used to about this. Sometimes I do. It's not a perfect score. It's a practice. And I think when I decided, and some of this is super recent, I went through a rough time recently with some very big things in life, some very big things that came up, and I got really upset. And people said, "You need to go back to therapy," and I was like, "No, wait a minute." This is big stuff. And it's understandable that I'm this upset and I'm having a hard time. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that I've gotten out of all of this. You know what? No. I'm not going to invalidate my own experience, because that's kind of how all of this started in the first place, is it not? So I just said, okay, I've been depressed, I've had rough stuff going on, there are these things, it's okay. And with that, the depression started to lift. And I started to it didn't mean that it didn't still suck, But I just went, I don't like where I'm at right now, and I'm having a hard time with these things, and I have health issues now. I am not where I used to be physically. You can't see most of them, I understand. But I can do these things. That's the dialectic, right? Is my body doesn't work the way that it used to, and I'm learning all these really cool ways that I can make things work for me where I'm at now. So it's working, and it'll continue to work. And I'm going to allow myself that I don't have to be perfect, because you know what? Normal's a farce. Nobody's perfect. A lot of people are way better than me at pretending like they are, I think. At least that makes me feel better. So yeah, recovery for me. I forgive myself for not always being perfect. I forgive myself for graduating from DBT and still having a rough time. I'm still emotionally sensitive. It's okay. But you know what? I'm funny and I'm creative and I like to do stuff. So come talk to all of you. I would say that if you're someone who struggles with BPD, to you that it's okay and it's not your fault, and that it gets better, and sometimes it still sucks a little bit, but that's okay, and that you can bounce back from that. We're Weeble Wobbles. That's what I came up with recently. I don't know if you all remember, but they were those blow-up toy things where you'd punch them and they'd fall down and then come right back up. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. So that's us. And if you're a loved one of somebody with BPD, I would, one, take care of yourself, because this is an intense journey for you too. I've seen all my loved ones go through it. I have a lot that stuck around eventually, which thank goodness for them, or came back. But maybe, if you can, hold on to the idea that it's a process and a practice and not a perfection. We're still going to get upset sometimes. It doesn't mean that everything failed or, we've completely fallen back. We just need a little bit of time and loving and understanding. And of course, you want to have your own healthy boundaries and all that. And I know there's plenty of resources out there to help you find those. But thanks for letting me come talk to you. Now I feel all tapped up and awake.